Hey there! My name is Rita Jones, and I'm the director of the Center for Gender Equity at Lehigh University. Welcome to Adulting 101, planting and harvesting from scratch. I'm not making the seeds, but I am going to show you through a course of videos over this season how to plant seeds and turn them into amazing vegetables and flowers that you can harvest later on. I hope you enjoy watching this series. I am not a professional gardener. This is just how I do it, so this is one of many ways, and I hope you enjoy getting a little dirty and having some good food. So join me in this journey. Before we get started with anything, the first step is to think about when you're sowing your seeds indoors. It's usually about 4 to 6 weeks before you would want to transfer them outside that you'd want to start germinating them inside. But you can definitely go a little bit longer, especially after you've practiced with the seeds for a little bit and see how hardy some of the plants get once they're inside. If you have a lot of room inside that is full of warmth, has a lot of heat and a lot of light, whether it's artificial or natural, you can certainly start your seeds really early. And if you have a lot of different supplies, like I do because I've been collecting them for decades, then what I can do is start my seeds in a really small pot and then transfer them over time to bigger pots before I move them outside. If you can't do that though, you want to wait for the 4 to 6 week period, because if you only have small containers or a very few of them, you don't want your plants to get too big because the roots will get root bound and they won't transfer very well. So I'm at early April. I'm late, I'm behind schedule, but that's okay. I'm still gonna try to plant a few things inside. I figure the longer they can grow, the better, the quicker their growing season will be. So we'll see what we do, and now let's take a look at the different supplies that you need. The supplies that you need to start seeds indoor are really pretty simple. You're gonna need some soil. I just use like some regular potting soil. I think it's really important to have a spray bottle because the seeds are going to be really delicate and you don't want to move the soil around too much. I always try to make sure that I have something to write with and some way to mark the seeds that I'm working with. And then I have a wide assortment of items that I use to put seeds into. Now again, as I mentioned, I've been collecting for a long time. So when I go to the nursery and I get some seeds, I always save these trays. This is a really high quality one because it's got the drainage container at the bottom so water doesn't spill over my house, and then it's got a lot of drainage holes, and that's a key. You really want to make sure that your containers have a lot of drainage holes. So here's another one that I've picked up from another time along my journey of gardening. I, though, also reuse lots of things, so you don't even have to go to the nursery to do any of this. So here's a lid that I've collected from another item. Can't always recycle lids, so I use it as a saucer to put then these kinds of things in so that they can drain. That's really key, that you need to make sure that your pots can drain. Or sometimes you can use these kind of containers depending upon what comes inside of it. I've used these containers for different purposes. So sometimes I use them to put the pots right inside, again, to hold the water so it doesn't get all over my house. But sometimes I even just fill these containers full of soil, and they're really great for growing microgreens or other small herbs, vegetables that you might want to try. And here's another thing that you can do. So here's a jar, plastic jug of something that we used. So all you have to do is just get your scissors, and I've already cut this, but I just cut it in half so that I have this smaller amount that I can use. And then I poked drainage holes in the bottom of this, which you can't see totally well, but I just did it with, a good old-fashioned screwdriver, and I just poked holes in the bottom to create some drainage. So again, you don't really have to have a lot of high-tech tools. You just need to make sure that you have them on hand. In my mind, gardening and gender interface and intersect, and for me it's multiple fold and complex. And part of it was when I was growing up, I grew up on a small family farm, and the bulk of the farm production was probably more gendered that the men did that kind of work, although the women were also participating in a lot of elements of harvest. But the home gardens and each household on my family farm had a home garden, and that was really the territory of the women in the family. They created the gardens, they weeded them, they harvested, they froze and canned everything. And of course, there are also different belief systems about how some genders are more in tune with the seasons and the rhythm of the earth than others. And we certainly still see certain social norms and roles about which gender does the kind of caretaking and work around a house. And sometimes I've noticed in professional settings, it's often men who are the professional gardeners, and we don't see always a lot of women. And when it becomes the professionalized and not just something that happens domestically or it's just required, I need to do this in order to have food, we see men. But if it's at the home and kind of hidden, that invisible labor is sometimes not always men. And as you see over the course of the harvesting season, I'm really working hard not to use any herbicides or pesticides whenever I can avoid it, as my responsibility to living with the earth. And I also realize that the result of that is that some things are not going to make it or harvest quite as much, and that's going to be okay. Okay, the next step that we're going to talk about is seeds. A really important step, and also a way to kind of think about how you can continue creating and harvesting your plants from year to year. And I'm going to show you a few different methods that I have for obtaining my seeds. If you buy seeds commercially, two things you really want to check. So one, you can check the expiration date. Seeds usually germinate more likely the closer they are to harvesting. It's not that they won't germinate if you go past the expiration date, but just like anything, it can sometimes get a little old. And I don't know, but I think the exterior of the seed, the hull, can maybe get a little bit rough and hard to for the water to penetrate, but it's something you want to check. The other really important part to check is, do the seeds like to be sown indoors first, or do they like to be directly planted right into the soil outside? Some plants do not transplant well, so make sure that if you're doing commercial, or even if somebody has given you some seeds, do a little bit of research to find out which plants like to be transplanted or are okay with that, and which ones are not too happy. Also check to see if you are planting anything that can go a little bit wild. So anything in the mint family, for example, can take over an area. So if you don't want a whole patch of mint all over everything, then you might want to plant that in a pot to control how and where the plant goes. Okay, so let's take a little bit of a look at the seeds that I have. So here are some seeds, for example, that I'm going to have to direct soil, or a direct plant right into the soil, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. What I've also done, though, I'm going to do this for everything, is I sort of take out the seeds that I'm going to use and I make sure that I label them. So I am a huge tomato fan, and so I have 4 different varieties of tomatoes that I'm going to plant. And it's important to note that you may want to plant a few more seeds than you think you will need plants for, because you're not sure which ones of them will germinate and which ones don't. Okay, so here's a bit of a silly part of Rita's way of planting. I read a long time ago about different communities and cultures who have a third rule. They plant a crop, a third of it is for human consumption, a third of it is for animal critter consumption as they come through the garden or field area, and a third is for seeds for the future. So I always try to collect seeds. I have a lot of them, and here I'm going to show you a little of what that looks like. So right here is dill that I grew in my garden last year, and I let some of it go to seed so that I would have some of those seeds to replant. There's pumpkin seeds in here. And these right here are pine seeds that I'm actually going to try to do something with, and this is a pumpkin seed. And then I have this other squash that a friend of mine gave me to try called lao, and as you can see, it looks a little bit different from the pumpkin seed. The lao is a little bit thicker, has a bit more girth to it, and is much more rectangular and squarish. So I'm definitely going to plant some lao. And then I have this, which is a mystery seed. I know what the plant looks like, I just don't know what it's called. It was in this really cool velvety pod. It was a big pod, and I thought it was quite interesting. And I brought the pods home. I found them on the ground near the plant that it was, kind of like a tree or a vine. And I put them in my porch, and one day I heard what sounded like a little explosion, and it was the pod popping open because they got warm enough, and out were these seeds. So I think I might try to plant one and see what I get. Who knows? It's the mystery seed. We'll find out. So I also mentioned to you that some plants don't like to be transplanted. So I have a list of direct sow plants so that you can kind of follow along. So early, even before it freezes, I'm going to put in some peas, arugula, and carrots because they really like the cold weather. They don't mind at all. In fact, the peas in particular and the arugula really don't like the heat, and the peas will just die and the arugula will bolt, which means it'll just send up runners to create seeds to protect itself. After there's no more danger of frost and the ground has warmed up and the air is getting warmer, I can plant these. So I'm going to plant a couple different kinds of beans, green beans, as well as dragon tongue beans. And the dragon tongue beans, sometimes I can't find seeds for, so I definitely make sure that I harvest some of the dragon tongues in seed form each year. I'll also do some cilantro, a few different kinds of chard, definitely dills, and certainly flowers. I encourage you to consider planting flowers of any kind and any sort of flowering herb in your garden, mixing it in with your vegetables, because not surprisingly, pollinators like bees really like to be around the flowers. And the more of those that you can have in with your vegetables, I think it's better. Plus, it just looks really pretty. You can always have these flowers growing. You can cut them if you want. You can save them for seeds or just let them grow and see what happens. But it certainly adds a lot of different color because, not surprisingly, the vegetables, while I love them to death, are really green. So if I put in a lot of different flowers, then I can get some different colors in the garden, which is always fun to come out and watch. As you can see, I've got all my pots filled with some dirt so that I can start putting the seeds in them. And I've also taken a little bit of time to label everything so that I know exactly what's going into which container, and that way I don't get myself confused. I also took a little bit of time to put some dark tape around the plastic container that I cut apart, because a lot of times seeds will germinate a bit more quickly if they're hotter, and they'll be more hot if they're in something that is dark rather than clear. I should have mentioned that I've covered my surface with a bunch of garbage bags that I can actually reuse later on. They're just to kind of protect my floor. Although if you're super klutzy like me, I just kicked over some dirt, you might want to have a little shop vac or some kind of brush or broom that you can clean stuff up with, because it might fall out. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to pretty much drench all of the soil. So this potting soil is just come out of the container and it's pretty dry, and the best way for your seeds to germinate is if it's in nice moist conditions. In fact, some seeds you have to soak 24 to 48 hours before you try to plant them, so that that heavy part of the soil can or seed can soften up. Now, as you can see, hopefully with this one, look how much the soil has gone down in my pot. Because you don't have to cover seeds very much, what I tend to do is then come back and add some more soil to this and add a little more water. This is what I like to see. So the water has come through all the way through my soil, all the way through the pot, which means it's going to be nice and wet. And I'm just going to leave it there so that it can continue to absorb some water. Again, I'm going to fill this up so that it's all the way to the top, and then I'm going to water all of the rest of the pots. One other thing that I should mention is that you should, at the end of each season, when you take your seeds out of these pots, wash these really good with soap and water or even a mild bleach solution and let them dry really well. And that way you're not allowing any mold or any other icky stuff growing from season to season. What I've done is filled up all the pots back with dirt to make sure that they're nice and full after I drenched them pretty good. You can see I still have like some water sticking around in different places, and that's okay. And now I'm going to show you how I plant the seeds. So again, I have my seeds out, they're labeled. What I would suggest doing is putting 2 seeds into each small container that you have, because you're not really sure what's going to germinate. So I put the 2 seeds in and really just barely cover them with the potting soil. You don't have to plant them very deep because they're going to be protected since they're indoors. I'm going to get a couple more. One. Slightly cover them up. You definitely want to smush them down in there a little bit, but don't poke them too hard because they're not outside right now. They aren't very strong as seedlings, and they're not going to be able to push up through the soil if you put it in too deep. So just move the soil to the side, making a little trough. I put in a couple of seeds, lightly cover them back up, and then I do the same one more time and cover them with my potting soil. You can also have a little bit of potting soil, like I told you I accidentally kicked one over, so I've got potting soil all over. Put a little bit. Now this is where your spray bottle comes in handy, because you're going to want to make sure you saturate the tops of the soil. And again, I use a spray bottle until my seedlings come up fully, because they're not very strong, and if I try to pour water in, it's going to push the seedlings over and drown them. Once you've finished doing this, move on to the next pot. I'm really fortunate that I have this screened-in porch where I get a lot of afternoon sun. So this is late day sun, and I'm going to get it because this is a south-facing window, and the plants are really going to enjoy that. Piper the cat will not, because she likes to patrol these areas, but I'm going to fill all of these different containers with the little seed pots that I just planted. I now have all of the pots with a nice protector underneath them lined up along the windowsills so that I can get a nice amount of light each day. And I've even created a spot where I have the labels down below so I know what's growing in each pot. If you don't have this kind of southern light, full light each day, just find different spots in your house where either you can install a plant light that you can hang right above the plants so it's not too far above them to give them some heat and light, or just move your plants around from different windowsill to windowsill and it'll work. One final note, as I mentioned earlier, some species are really invasive, and so you might want to plant them in a pot that you can just take outside and set on the sidewalk, your doorstep, or in your garden. One of those is epazote, which I really like in Mexican cooking. So I have one pot for epazote, and then I had some extra sage seeds that accidentally fell out of my seed pod, or my little envelope, And so I decided that I would plant them in the middle of this planter. And then later on in the season, I'm gonna try to put some annuals around the outside. I think that would be really neat with the sage coming out of the top, very odoriferous. It'll smell really good and have some beautiful color around it, and that way I can harvest directly from my pot. Thanks for watching this first installment of Seeds to Plant and Harvest. And as we move through the season, I'll keep updating you on the different steps. It's important to remember to keep your plants nice and moist to the touch. If you're getting a lot of heat and light, you might have to do that once or twice a day, because if your plant pots are very shallow, they're going to dry out more quickly, and your seeds are not going to germinate very quickly if they get dry. So check in for different videos and different segments as we watch these seeds turn into seedlings, and then we'll transplant them outdoors and get to the harvest later on. Take care. Bye.